Welcome to Financial Issues, where we join reality with truth, helping you make the most of your money by honoring God with your investments. Now listen in as we give you the practical tools and advice you need to become a biblically responsible investor.
Welcome to Financial Issues. We're so glad that you tuned in today. Financial Issues is a stewardship ministry, and we help you be a good steward of everything the Lord has given you, because we first acknowledge that God gave us everything. So on today's show, we're going to get to your questions right up front. We're also going to take a look at the odds of recession and how we should be thinking about it. I've got my friend, colleague, and longtime Financial Issues partner, Jason MacDowell, coming on in the second part of the show to have that discussion. But let's start today in a very good place to start. It's always good to start with the Word of God. Our stewardship verse today comes from Philippians 4:6. It is very appropriate for these times. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your request be known to God. Well, when we use our physical senses to take in everything happening around us, wars, rumors of wars, financial meltdown, recession, market crashes, the next pandemic, what's going on with the food supply, recession, market crashes, the list goes on and on. So it's really hard to obey what the scripture says here and to not be anxious. How do we actually do that? Well, we don't have to look far to get the answer. It comes in the next part of the verse. Be thankful for what we have, because it's a lot when we really look at it from a spiritual vantage point, to look at everything that God gave us, not only the physical resources that we can see, but the spiritual heritage and the promises that we have in the Bible through Jesus. We are to count and recount our many blessings. That sure changes my perspective when I'm starting to feel anxious. A lot of times I'll just get up because I'm usually sitting behind my computer, and walk around and just look around and start to look at all of the blessings that God has given me. I see my kids' things, or my kids, and I remember them, and I remember my spouse, and just the roof over my head and everything that the Lord has given me. So, that can really take my mind in another direction when I start to just thank God for everything that He's already done. And we are to pray. We are to make our request known to God. It's not that He doesn't know what we need or what we want, but I think He knows that we feel better once we've made sure that He knows what we need when we tell Him through prayer. There's even science that confirms that the act of prayer creates positive physiological changes to our bodies. So let me encourage you to take a long-term or eternal perspective in everything that you think about, not just investing. So when anxiety creeps in, let's be thankful, let's trust God, and let's pray. Have anything to add, Seth?
Amen, Shana. You nailed it. That was awesome. I say amen and amen to it. Let's do that today for sure.
Yep. All right. We've got some questions.
Yeah, let's get to these here, Shana. Will is up first, 66. He says, Shana, I got a question about a specific stock that had the FI code E22, but is now E31 on the energy broad list. It is a foundational and an income stock as well. There was a BRI watch list alert back in October of 2024. Should it be on the broad list now? And did it go off as E22 and then back on as E31? I have some shares, and I assume I should just hold them for now. What do you think?
Yes, so we did issue a soft sell alert on it. We were, back in October, ahead of the election, we were encouraging partners to slightly increase their cash position. So we gave some recommendations for things that you could look at. It was a company that we put as a soft sell. It is still on the broad list. It remains on the broad list. The number did change. We have just been, doing some housekeeping things just for data and search purposes. But it did change to E31. So it was E22 on the alert. If you're going back to October of 2024 to go look that up. So yes, it is still on the broad list. It's on BRO watch. What that means is that it's technically clean. We don't have it hasn't violated any screen, so we don't have a solid reason to issue a sell alert for BRI reasons. But it was one that we suggested that you could reduce or eliminate if you needed to create that catch.
Nice, Shana. Next one up here is a different William, actually. This William is 69. He says, I've been made aware of a newly published book that discusses how to avoid paying taxes and acquiring wealth. The book's called Be Smart, Pay Zero Taxes by Mark Kwan. Now, the book uses margin loans taken from stock investments that are tax-free. Is this practice biblically responsible, and are you familiar with the book at all, Shana?
I have never heard of the book, so I can't speak to any of its content. It sounds like a very risky strategy, though. Taking margin loans is a very risky strategy. So margin loans also, although they may be tax-free, you have to pay interest on your margin loans. And that interest could potentially, I don't know how old the book is. You say it's a new book, but margin interest does eat into your returns. So using margin is also a risky strategy, because the way that margin works is that you have money that you can borrow available as a percentage of the value of the stocks that you own in your portfolio. The problem is that if the value increases, the amount of money that you can borrow, your margin available, decreases as well, and you get a margin call. So if you don't have the cash to pay off that margin call, and you get that margin call because the market has declined and your investments have decreased in value, now you're going to be forced to sell off some of your stocks to pay back those margin that margin call. So it definitely does not mesh with our strategy at all.
Yeah, well said there, Shana. And, I'd encourage William from a spiritual perspective, too. Just remember Matthew 22:21, our Lord says, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Mm-hmm. Paying taxes, as much as we don't like it, is a biblical command.
Right.
And so I think that's a good reminder for that, too. Yeah.
Right. So would you rather pay taxes to the government or margin interest to your brokerage account?
Exactly. Well, that's really well said there, Shana. Good stuff. Pete is up next. Pete is 64. Pete is asking about a lot of different materials holdings that he has, Shana. He uses the age 45 to 55 model, and he's saying, shall we sell a specific company and maybe another one of the companies and replace it with one or two stocks in different materials sectors? Which one of these should I sell? He mentions probably 7 or 8 different holdings there, Shana.
Okay. So, he does list out several of them, and I just want to encourage partners, when you write in, please don't send us a list of everything that you own and ask us to build a portfolio for you. So what we do at Financial Issues is we give you a do-it-yourself strategy. There is a do-it-yourself component to the strategy. We give you the asset allocation model. We give you the buy list. We give you some parameters, one of which I would say is to have, at least 1% in your individual stock positions. So just, looking at a glance, if you've got 7 or 8 positions, and let's say that your the target for that particular sector is 5%, well, that tells me that there are some companies that you don't have 1% in, because you can't have 1% in 7 or 8 companies if the target is only 5%. So what I would say is take a look. I do see that several of those positions are sort of similar in what they do. So maybe pick the best one in that category and eliminate the others, and try to get your sector more in line with the targets.
Awesome, Shana. Good stuff. Probably the last one of this segment we'll get to here. Anthony, Shana is saying, what is your opinion on buying shares in Newsmax? What sector would they belong to? What do you think?
All right. The easy part of that question is that they would belong to the communication services sector, which is not a sector that we have listed in our model. So we don't have exposure to it in any of our models. If we ever were to add, and I don't think Newsmax would be one of them at this point, but if we were ever to add something like that, and most communication services companies eliminate themselves from our strategy altogether because they're not biblically responsible because of the content that they carry on the air, which is very usually not family friendly. So we would if we were ever to include a company like that, we would probably lump it in with either discretionary or maybe technology. So it doesn't have any exposure in our asset allocation model. Looking at the specific company, it doesn't meet our criteria at this time. Their financials are a bit too scary. So they've had a Reg D offering that was only available to institutional investors. They've now opened it up to direct IPO purchases. But, from a historical perspective, IPOs are somewhat scary in and of themselves. Although you can make big gains, the long term, about 2/3 of IPOs underperform the market at the 3-year mark, which is getting into the longer term. And 64% or more lag more than 10% behind market returns. Went long there. We're at the end. Stay tuned. We've got Jason coming back next with me.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common: the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
In a time when children are facing unprecedented challenges, the gospel stands as the greatest source of hope. At Crossroads Kids Club, we have the incredible opportunity to bring the message of Jesus into public schools nationwide. Join us in sharing the life-changing hope of the gospel with the next generation. The need is urgent, but God's love is powerful. Together, we can offer Christ's love to children who are longing for it. To join us, visit reachourschools.com. That's reachourschools.com.
If a woman sees her baby on ultrasound, it doubles the likelihood that she'll choose life. And on top of that, we share the gospel of Jesus Christ with her. This is why you should support preborn. The donations that you give actually make a difference. Last year, 59,000 babies were saved because of what you have done with your generosity.
To find out how you can support the life-saving mission of preborn, go to preborn.com/FISM.
Securities offered through G.A. Reppel & Company, a registered broker-dealer and investment advisor, member FINRA and SIPC. Opinions expressed by Shana are hers alone and are for informational purposes only, and do not necessarily represent those of G.A. Reppel or the outlet on which you are listening. You should consider how the information applies to your situation prior to personally implementing it, and consult any financial professional you work with to make sure it's applicable to your financial plan.
Welcome back to Financial Issues. Thanks for sticking with us here. Well, I've got my friend, colleague, and longtime Financial Issues partner, Jason MacDowell, back to join me for a session, and we are going to be talking about whether or not we are about to have a recession, and what does that mean for us? So that seems to be the burning question on everyone's mind, even some media outlets dubbing it a Trump session that is on the way, and we've seen a lot of people weigh in. We've seen President Trump weigh in, and he said, sure, it's a possibility, but, no pain, no gain. We've seen Wall Street weighing in, giving their odds of what they think a recession is going to be. Pre-election, the odds of a recession were upwards of 50%, I think close to the 60% mark. Post-election, they've come down, but now maybe people don't have any patience these days. They expect things to happen overnight. So, now might be a good time to tackle this subject. So, Jason, let's start with that. Give us an overview of GDP.
Absolutely. All right. We're going to start with the definition of GDP, or the gross domestic product. It's a total value of all goods and services produced in a country over a specific period of time. It's used as an indicator of a country's economic health. Then it's also calculated by subtracting the value of intermediate goods and services used in production from the value of final goods and services produced. It's also calculated by adding up personal consumption, gross private investment, net exports, and government consumption and investment.
Yep. So to try to put that just in basic terms, it's the total output that a country produces with all of the resources that they have. So meaning Dan and now me, have been saying it for a long time that the way that the government calculates and reports some of its numbers is somewhat problematic, but we always do report the government numbers because, as Dan used to say, the government does a great job of indicting themselves with their own numbers. So I have been refreshed to hear leaders now in the current Trump administration saying what we have believed to be true for a long time. I'm glad that we are leaving an era of strength through weakness, being ashamed of American exceptionalism and the ideology that government is God, that the government should be responsible for supplying all of our needs, whether that's through universal basic income or equity programs or flat out just buying GDP by including government spending in our GDP numbers. And now we're moving to an era where American ingenuity and hard work will again be what GDP represents. So the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick mentioned recently that GDP count will start to break out government spending. So what does this mean for how we understand the GDP numbers? And it raises a bigger question. How much of our GDP has really been tied to government salaries, government federal regulations, and even questionable spending like, say, hamster fights on cocaine?
Yeah, so an economist used a great example of how to explain all this. If you cut out all the work our company and give them government jobs, nothing would happen. GDP would be the same, or actually would go up if you just give them high salaries. So this is because GDP counts output, or the price of a car, and when applied to the government, statisticians just add up the salaries. So my question is, right, was our GDP tied to the salaries, high salaries of combined federal workers to produce regulations, insane funding of asinine studies like coked out hamster fights? Well, yes.
Right. So the problem, what's problematic in that is that, DOGE is uncovering right now a lot of potential government employees who actually either don't exist or are not doing anything, or they're doing something. It's just not any government work. It's the second job that they have while they're still collecting their government paycheck. And so, if you count the spending and the salaries of someone who is doing little to nothing, that doesn't really represent accurate output. So why all this talk of paper recession? Will a recession really happen, or what is this talk of it just happening on paper?
So a recession is just defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product. So another economist has said that under Biden, government grew 3 times faster than the economy, which accounted for half of the GDP. So now if we remove those numbers, well, how's that going to look on paper, right? So there's also another part of that is with these tariffs, there's been an overbuying of imports to get ahead of the tariffs that Trump has been talking about, which still is really being used as a negotiation tactic, in my own personal opinion. The U.S. rules there. So that also has added a subtracting of GDP as far as just talks and how it could look on paper that way. But the biggest one really is just the decreased government spending. If that was being counted for, and you're seeing DOGE just kind of remove the head counts across the board and remove the federal buildings, those buildings they're spending money on too, they're getting rid of that, and they might be selling the land as well that the federal government owns. They own about 27% of the federal land. So if you remove all of that spending out of there, it's probably on paper the GDP is going to look like a negative. So that could be the possibility. It's kind of hard to get a say because the administration has been coming out and saying that they believe there's not going to be if things catch up, or there could be a transition period. So it might be because of the paper recession. I don't know.
Yeah.
We have to wait and see.
Yeah, last week I gave the example of what happened in Argentina, and how much Malay slashed their government workforce, and that was expected to slash GDP. Well, it does. If you're counting the salaries in GDP and you don't have those salaries anymore, it's not a big deal. But what you're left with is the real stuff, the real growth. Mm-hmm. So short-term pain looks sort of inevitable. Market volatility is up. Job numbers may dip with federal cuts and deportation. And of course, the Atlanta's Fed GDP model, like we just talked about, is showing contraction of 2.4%. So what does this mean? Before, as we were preparing for this, we kind of made the point, when people are really focused on recession, they're not really focused on recession. They're really focused on what does this mean for my portfolio. So what do you think there?
That's a great point. With the tariffs and the uncertainty, the market doesn't uncertainty, that's for sure, the back and forth. So add that to this definition of new remeasurement of GDP. Markets aren't going to like that either. They're going to think that they're in recession, and it's just, the reality we're going through. So the short-term pains will just be a transition, but that's also why with the FISM strategy, we are long-term investors. These could either be opportunities or, great points. We know that the new website is coming out at the end of this month. So that's a great example of what's coming out for the partners there. This would be a great talking point.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And I think Trump alluded to that. We can have some short-term pain, and I've said that for a long time. It's not going to be painless to transition to right this ship and to get it moving in the right direction. But one of the hallmarks of our strategy here at Financial Issues is to own, we're not traders, so we own solid companies for the long term. And therefore, we try to keep you grounded, helping you to keep your eye on the forest rather than the trees. So, what about this market volatility and recession?
Well, I kind of look at it, I guess, in my own words here, which is great. It's just, as long-term investors, we may see some negative in the short-term experience, but the short-term experience is most often survived by the long-term outcome. I like to root this back to the gospel. Life on earth is short, as according to the Bible, as it says, because it really is, and it may be negative at certain times, but the long-term eternity with Jesus is the better outcome, and it's going to be the best outcome. So I like to see it there as my connection to how the strategy is, rooted there with the gospel as well.
And that's what we try to do here at Financial Issues. We try to balance, what you're thinking of what's happening right here temporarily with with the markets, with your portfolio, with your finances, and weigh that out, balance that with eternity and with the things that we know, the truths that the Bible tell us. So there's so much focus on recession, though, probably because market corrections often come, and bear markets usually precede these recessions, and that tends to make a big impact when we look at our 401k statements, our investment statements, and things like that. But when we really zoom out, we see mountains that start to look like molehills. Does anybody really remember our last acknowledged recession and the market crash? What about you, Jason?
Yeah, actually, you had to remind me too of it. It's just funny how I was like, did they just cover it up? That was my question. And yeah, 2020. Let's start with that. When people ask about the economy, they're really asking, what about my portfolio, in the market? So when I think about that period of time, specifically March to April, the market, specifically the S&P 500, dropped about 32% from March to April, kind of when COVID was ramping up and sort of the shutdowns were happening slowly. But if you zoom that out to the end of the year, and we use a program, every day to take a look at this statistic, the S&P 500 finished up 15%. So it dropped 32% in 1 month. And then that black swan event that, Dan talked about, it didn't have any historical data to say what could happen with it. But the long term, which is really the short term, right? The end of that year, the market still finished up that year, specifically the S&P 500. So
Yeah, it's good. So speaking of God and our work here at the ministry, I know many partners are excited about the revisions to the asset allocation models coming out, and they will be out soon. But I've been working on the models, and Jason, you've seen sort of the back end internal progress of that. What's your take on it if there's been a delay in getting them out?
God is sovereign. So, you and I were just talking about this the other day. For all the work that got put into it, I have seen it. It's been wonderful. It's going to be a great service to the partners. If you're on the fence right now on being a partner and been listening, this would be a great quarter to partner with the ministry, especially with the website and the new asset allocation models, especially since this market correction has actually happened. And there's some great direction that we have for partners of the ministry. So
that's God's sovereignty. So as much as we tried to get it out and get it done in a short period of time, God sees the bigger picture. And, I think these new asset allocation models are going to come just in time. All right, folks, if you're listening on an outlet that only carries the short version of the show, we have to wish you a farewell today. But we hope that you'll catch the full episodes on our website or our phone app. We're also on podcasts and a lot of social media outlets, so look for us wherever you do. For everyone else, stick around. We've got more financial issues right after this.
Where's Mima? We found out Shepard's diagnosis when I was about 17 weeks pregnant. We learned that he was going to need a series of surgeries after he was born in order to give him what they considered a normal life. And we weren't sure how this worked.
Yeah, very emotional, very, very broken. And as my wife just said, not sure how this worked. And called Samaritan, and they said, you just go have that baby. You leave the rest to us.
And just to hear the confidence on the other end of the phone of this is not something that you need to be concerned about at all. You focus on the health of your family, the health of your baby, and we will walk with you every step of the way.
Be there for you.
I know.
wife and I, we moved into this neighborhood. We had some experience with Crossroads Kids Club. We had served at another club. We kind of thought to ourselves, like, it would be really, really cool for us to actually bring in a club that was able to share the love of Jesus with kids directly into the school. And so we started our Crossroads at Hilltop.
Crossroads is amazing. You can learn all kinds of things about God. That He loves all of us. He died on the cross to pay for our sins. That He will help me in every way.
There is just such tremendous opportunity to reach kids in some of these areas that just aren't being reached.
Sometimes I pray every night. When I feel alone sometimes, God is right there sitting next to me. I can rely on Him no matter what happens.
To learn more about Crossroads Kids Club and how you can get involved, visit reachOurschools.com.
Hey, welcome back, folks, to Financial Issues. Boy, it is good to be here with you this morning. I'm Seth Udinsky, here with you this segment. We appreciate you joining us on the program today. Hey, I got a special guest, folks. I am very excited to have a true example of Christ-likeness, a godly patriot, and really a blessing to the church and to our country joining me on the program today. I've got Jenna Ellis. Jenna is a national syndicated radio host, senior policy advisor at the American Family Association, and a former Trump legal counsel joining me on the program today. Jenna, it's great to have you back. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Seth, and for that very kind introduction. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to share some of your expertise with us here, Jenna. So I wanted to get you on the program, kind of hear your thoughts about the cultural tide shift that we're seeing in the year 2025. We had you on in the aftermath of Trump's win, and now there's a new sheriff in town, as it were. And so it feels like an exciting time, and in many ways, I think a second chance for America. So just to begin, what do you make of the early stages of the Trump presidency, the second term as a whole? You know, he ran on a lot of these promises of bringing America back to a place of greatness. Of course, we on our show focus a lot on those financial aspects of it and seeing how he's doing with that. But in your opinion, you think he's on his way to fulfilling these promises that he made?
I think it's been phenomenal so far. It's only been 3 weeks, and he's already made significant headway, not just in keeping his promises, but really restoring the meaning of the American experiment and American exceptionalism. And I think the difference between the first term and Trump 2.0 is that he came in already starting day one. I mean, we saw just hours after his inauguration, he signed over 200 executive orders. That didn't happen the first time. And it's because he's coming in with a lot more knowledge of the deep swamp and what exactly he has the power to do. And so I'm really excited about it. And in terms of a cultural shift, I think you're seeing through the Trump mandate, but really it was the voters' mandate as a whole for government from the federal level all the way down to state and local, a complete and utter rejection of the left's cultural Marxism and their false worldview of government. And so I think you're seeing a return to simply common sense with things like the executive order that Trump signed this week on banning men from women's sports. I mean, things that are so common sense, like securing the borders and ensuring that we have national sovereignty. I mean, those are the things that Americans voted for. And I'm very encouraged to see a lot of the red states following that lead. And I think we're going to see 4 years of restoring American greatness.
Absolutely. I'm all for it, as I know you are as well. You know, we were talking about this beginning of Trump's second term, and you mentioned some of those biggest and best moves. One of them, a very recent one, protecting women and girls in sports. How about common sense there? Making huge strides to protect children from gender mutilation as well. It's hard to believe that this is even a conversation that we're having, but seeing a return to normalcy, I think, is amazing. What do you make of these moves in particular?
I think they're fantastic, and I think that Congress also needs to follow up with codifying some of these executive orders into law so that we don't just have 4 years of this return to common sense, but we actually have enduring wins. And so actually on my AFR podcast this Friday, I have a conversation, long form with Congressman Jim Jordan on exactly that, on following this up with legislation. I know out of my home state of Florida as well. I had Governor DeSantis on radio last week talking about the Florida legislature and the moves to push for enforcing Trump's immigration policy here in Florida. I know Governor Abbott just met with Donald Trump from the state of Texas as well. There's 17 attorneys general that are looking into Anthony Fauci and holding him accountable, and then giving the legislature as well some common sense moves so that we don't have the ridiculous nonsense of COVID hysteria. We have Marco Rubio that's basically taken U.S. aid and is thoroughly dismantling it. I mean, to have, thousands of dollars and then ultimately billions of dollars, but thousands and hundreds of thousands spent on all of these LGBT priorities, like, LGBT theater in other countries. This is a ridiculous use of taxpayer money. And speaking of the financial issues that I know you cover so well, having this reduction in spending, as well as the promise to deal with the exorbitant income tax that Americans have suffered under, those are two policy priorities I think will really help everyday Americans. And again, not only a return to sanity and common sense, but also the promise of liberty and freedom. It's a biblical principle that we get to keep what we earn. Of course, we're good taxpayers, but when tax ultimately becomes theft, and it is so outrageous that we're spending on priorities that nobody ever voted for, We should be applauding Donald Trump for looking at all of this waste and also putting more of our hard-earned property back into our pockets.
Yeah, you love to see it. You really do. I sometimes we'll talk about this on our show as well, how the question of, okay, what should tax dollars be used for? I'm okay with my tax dollars being used if it's going to fund a strong military, or if it's going to fund infrastructure, if it's going to fund keeping the law. I'm not okay with my tax dollars funding Michelle Obama memorial trails or different nonsensical things like our government has spent money on in the last couple of years. But I agree with you completely, Jenna. It's great to see that. So let me ask you this particular question here. I have heard from some folks, family members, friends, different people like that, who were very anti-Trump. And one of their reasons was they viewed him as an anti-woman president, and they viewed Kamala Harris as more pro-woman. I'm just not seeing that with Donald Trump making moves to clean up our country, to get rid of people who might rape young girls because they're criminals and they entered our country illegally, or cleaning up women's sports as well, keeping it safe for women. How is it possible that the left has such a delusional view of who he is with this stuff?
Well, they've always lied about Donald Trump, and having worked for him personally and knowing him personally, I can say that that's utterly false, that he's anti-women or is anything less than pro-women and pro-common sense. They wanted to uphold Kamala Harris as somehow more pro-women simply by her virtue signaling that she is a woman. But she would not have been pro-women. She was all about putting transgenders into women's sports. That's undercutting women. It's undercutting all of the unborn women in the womb to advance abortion priorities. I mean, there is nothing pro-women, pro-mother, pro-baby, anything that deals with women's issues in particular, the family, all of these things that Kamala Harris and the radical left stand for. And so when they want to just make it about gender, it's the same ridiculous notion that somehow we should prefer a gender or an immutable characteristic of our surgeon. I don't really care what that person looks like or whether they're a man or a woman. I want to know that they're able to competently perform their job. And that is exactly what merit-based means, and why Trump has so effectively gone after the whole DEI lie. And so for all of the left that continues to try to put Trump into this box, I think it's failed since 2015, and it's going to continue to fail. Now, a lot of people, like myself, supported Governor DeSantis, supported other candidates in the primary. Sure. But ultimately, we supported Donald Trump in the general election because we recognized that he would have this type of view that was such a contrast to Kamala Harris. And so for anybody on the conservative side that wants to go back to the primaries, it's like, listen, we had a wide bench. That's a good thing. That's right. But we are all on Team Trump moving forward. Yeah. No, that's awesome. It is. I agree with you. It's great to have that deep bench. And then when you got the one that rises to the top, time to put the support behind him. Absolutely. Well, Jenna, I want to move on to really something that connects to the main topics of our show, finance and business, and particularly something that you and the AFA Foundation recently announced. So the 9-year boycott of Target has now come to an end victoriously in many ways. You guys had instituted this boycott of Target really upon the inception of when the company allowed cross-gender bathrooms. And the boycott has now served its purpose and is now over. What can you tell us about this? And just give us a picture of the success of this as well, because this is huge. It really is. And that announcement came earlier this week from our president, Tim Wildman, saying that this was a phenomenal success. The boycott, because Target lost millions of dollars in revenue when Christians refused to shop there over the last decade. But calling this now a success and saying that Target's board is taking a little bit of a different approach, I think is now serving the purpose ultimately of what the boycott originally stood for, which is to say when companies backtrack their policies, they return to common sense, then we're happy to spend our money there and to applaud them and to have what I call kind of a reverse boycott, or actually an investment in those companies to champion their reversal of those policies. So I think this was the perfect timing for AFA to announce that, especially coming off the heels of those great executive orders from President Trump. And so I'm looking forward to Target continuing to implement just common sense and actually pro-America, pro-rational policies.
Absolutely. Jenna, you talk often on your show about the need to stand up for truth. What should Christians do as we're seeing a lot of wins, but also we don't want to stop? We want to keep moving forward. How can we stand up for the truth as the God-ordained values of gender and sexuality and other things like that? You mentioned the attack on the unborn, those things are still coming under fire. How can we stand for the truth?
Of course, well, we know in this fallen world until the Lord returns or calls us home, then evil will persist. And that's why Ephesians 5 talks about taking advantage of every opportunity because the days are evil. And that doesn't change whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the White House. Evil will still persist. I mean, the lies of the devil aren't just going to roll over and say, well, we lost this election, so let's just let America turn back to Christian truth. And so that's why we need to take advantage of being the party in power right now to say, let's make these strides, enduring wins, so that we don't just take the 5 steps back, 2 steps forward, and ultimately lose ground. We need to continue to pursue ground for truth and for righteousness. And every Christian needs to be a good civil steward of our government that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and recognize that here in America, we have a very unique opportunity to influence our government. And that's why AFA Action is doing such an amazing job at influencing the Trump administration, championing them and encouraging them to continue on standing up for truth.
It's awesome. Jenna, appreciate you so much. Thank you for joining us. Folks, you got to check out Jenna's show every day, wherever you get your podcasts as well. We appreciate the work you're doing, Jenna, so much, and look forward to the next time that we have you on. We got more financial issues, folks, coming up right after this break. You don't want to miss it. Stick with us.
It's up to us to stand up and say, enough is enough. All of this unbiblical stuff that's going on, whether it's abortion or transsexual or LGBTQ, widespread pornography, human trafficking. Bottom line, it's still up to us. If we stop investing in these corporations that are trying to destroy us, sooner or later they're going to wake up.
To learn more about biblically responsible mutual funds and ETFs, go to timothyplan.com.
Hi, this is Shana Bird, the host of Financial Issues. The Financial Issues family is so blessed to have saved tens of thousands of babies, all thanks to the generous support of you, our listeners and viewers. For $140, you can sponsor 5 ultrasounds. Please go to preborn.org, that's preborn.org, or financialissues.org and click on the Preborn logo. Save a baby, save a life.
What separates Crossroads Kids Club from other ministries to reach school-age children? What sets you guys apart?
First of all is our connection with local churches. We mobilize, equip, train, support local church partners. We're right inside the schools. There's a number of ministries that try to serve public school children outside of the school, but we're able to be right there on the campus. Another key thing is just our values. Our highest value is actually relationships. And so we're not a ministry that's driven by a lot of fancy technology or flashy stuff, but rather getting adults who love Jesus and who love kids to sit on the floor with a group of kids, to listen to them, to love them. So I would say the relational emphasis and the simplicity of the model is actually something that makes Crossroads special as well.
Help reach kids with the hope of the gospel. Visit reachOurschools.com.
The opinions and recommendations expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of the station or any of the program sponsors. Additionally, all products or services offered by the program sponsors may not be known by the program.
Folks, I got to tell you, I am profoundly grateful for Jenna Ellis and for the work that she does, not only on her radio show over on AFR, but for everything that she's done for our country also. So grateful for the connection that we have with her, and you can bet we'll be getting her back on the show sometime soon for certain. But thank you, Jenna, for that interview. It was delightful to get to do that. Folks, I do want to remind you, if you are looking for biblically responsible options, mutual funds, ETFs, retirement plans, the Timothy Plan is really the way to go for you. You got to check them out, timothyplan.com. Again, timothyplan.com. And maybe if you're new to investing and you want to look for, a possible place to get started. Check them out, timothyplan.com. It would be well worth your time. Speaking of investments, and in particular in ETFs and mutual funds, that's really our topic of the remainder of the show. Is oftentimes we get a lot of questions about the difference between these two types of investments. And so I'd love to share some thoughts from Shana with you all on this. ETFs versus mutual funds, a comparison of them, the basics, how they work, different things like that. So to start, this first clip here is just Shana speaking about the differences and similarities between ETFs and mutual funds. Here's Shana Burt.
The difference between ETFs and mutual funds. Well, in ETF, I guess we'll start with a basic definition of what they are. An ETF is actually a security that trades like a stock, but it's a set of stocks or it may be a group of stocks that mimic an index like the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ or the Russell 2000. There's a lot of different ones out there. It could also track or mimic a set of commodities or, even some types of fixed income. A mutual fund, on the other hand, is a collective investment in which money from many investors is pooled together and invested in either stocks, bonds, short-term money market instruments, or other securities under the direction of a fund manager. So those two things sound pretty similar. Here are some ways that you can distinguish between the two of them. So an ETF most ETFs have passive management. For example, the biblically responsible ETFs that we use set to mimic one of them mimics an index, the S&P 500. So it has a set strategy or a set number of rules that you can think of it as a funnel, and it dumps all the investable securities into these funnels. And it has to be, a large company. It has to be U.S. based. It has to have 4 quarters of positive earnings. And of course, it has to pass through the biblically responsible screening tool to be included in that ETF. And then it's managed in the way that it's professionally selected, and then twice a year it is, you can think of it, everything being dumped back through that funnel to see what qualifies at that point. So there's really, there's not trading that happens in it. As with a mutual fund, you have an active manager, and that active manager, you can think, I said it was like a pool of investment. So you can think kind of a swimming pool, and the portfolio manager is the lifeguard. So they're the ones that tell people to get in and out of the pool. If they see someone drowning, they can reach in and grab them out. So with a mutual fund, a manager can, if they see a stock declining in value and they determine that it's a reason to sell it, they can sell it in between, whereas you don't really have that with the ETFs. Other differences are cost. So an ETF, because it is just passive management, there's not a lot that goes on there. You don't really have to pay fund managers just to mimic a commodity or an index. But there are other small costs. Mutual funds are more expensive because you're paying for that active management. Another difference is the way that they trade. So an ETF is an exchange-traded fund, which means that it trades on a major exchange and it can trade like stock. So while the market's open, you can place a trade, you can buy or sell shares of that ETF. A mutual fund, on the other hand, only has settlement once a day. So if you put in an order anytime while the market's open, you don't know what price you're going to get until the end of the day. So at the end of the day, the fund values itself, and that's how you pay the cost per share. Same thing when you go to sell it. If you sell it in the middle of the day, you'll know what how the transaction is going to settle at the end of the business day. So there's advantages, disadvantages, some that we've mentioned already. Mutual funds have active management. ETFs have passive management. ETFs have a little bit of an advantage in the tax area because with mutual funds, if the manager is buying and selling, if they're accumulating capital gains, the majority of those capital gains have to be paid out at the end of the year, and that can be a taxable event. So it's possible, even in a mutual fund, to see a negative return on the year, but to actually get a taxable gain if the manager's created some capital gains throughout the year. ETFs, since they only rebalance, maybe once or twice a year, whatever their rules state, it's under a different set of tax laws, and it's considered an exchange of one stock for another. So, they don't have those capital gains to distribute. Several other different differences between the two, but we use all three of ETFs, mutual funds, and individual securities in our portfolio construction with our strategy here at Financial Issues. We have different models that you can do strictly mutual funds or ETFs, or you can do a combination of all three of them. So we offer all of those. When you become a partner with Financial Issues, you're able to look at those different strategies and see which one works the best for you. And then we even have videos to help you get started in building and managing your own biblically responsible portfolio.
We certainly do, folks. And if you're looking for, again, that little bit of extra hand holding, that might be, maybe some of the comfort that you need. I know there's a lot of people out there who maybe they're considering investing, but they think, I'm not sure I have what it takes to be able to do that. The mutual fund and ETF strategy that we offer here at the ministry just might be the strategy for you. So you can check that out. That's the second of our two main strategy types that we offer. The first one is more of a do-it-yourself model, and that second one, again, is built entirely off of mutual funds and ETFs just like this. One more clip here from Shana where she actually takes a call, talks to a caller, just about some more of the comparisons between ETFs and mutual funds as they pertain to our investments. Here's Shana with that caller right now.
So what's the difference between the two stocks? One's small cap and one's aggressive.
Mm-hmm. So I think you're referring to the Timothy ETF and Timothy Mutual Fund. I think that's okay. So that's ETF 4. And people are always asking us to repeat those so the partners can know what we're talking about. ETF 4 and TM 47. So there's a lot of differences. So there are two types of securities. One is an ETF that trades like a stock. The other one is a mutual fund, which is an actively managed fund, pool of money that has a certain objective. Now, both of these investments are what you would consider aggressive type investments, so they aim for growth. The mutual fund is an actively managed security, so it's managed by a team of managers that pick and choose. They can buy and sell different securities along the objective of the mutual fund. The ETF is a passive strategy. So it's a predetermined strategy. It says, what's going to be found in this particular security is going to be based on this, and this, let's just say. And twice a year, all of the eligible securities are filtered back through their set of criteria, and the ETF is rebalanced. Another difference is the market cap. So the ETF just focuses on small companies, which does make it aggressive in nature. The mutual fund doesn't necessarily can include small, mid, large cap stocks, all of the above. So they are different enough to own both. You just have to kind of know the differences in some of the younger strategies. I believe that we've got both of them in there.
So, folks, hope that can be helpful for you. You know, one important part of our strategy as you're considering mutual funds, ETFs, and different types of investments like that is there really is an element to this where you have got to use your own conscience as your guide. We're here to help you. We're here to give you that hand-holding. But ultimately, we've said this before that, you know, if you're looking for the best financial advisor, that person is you. And so you may need to do just some of your own thinking to think about what your comfort level is, especially when considering the mutual fund or the ETF versus a traditional investment in equities. So that's something that we really feel like we want to encourage and empower you to be able to do that. We believe that the Lord has given you everything that you need to be able to be a good God-honoring investor. As long as you're trusting in Him, as long as you're following hard after Him, trying to honor Him with the money that He's given you, we believe He's going to bless you for it. And we believe He has already given you all the tools that you need, especially in wisdom and in common sense and in a desire to honor God. We believe that that's going to pay off well for you. So use those. Don't be afraid to make a decision based on your conscience with that. Great to be here with you today, folks. It was a joy to do it. God willing, we'll do it again tomorrow. Until next time, remember, everything you have belongs to the Lord. Let's be found good and faithful stewards with what God has given to us. We'll see you next time for more financial issues.
If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under.
Thank you for joining us. This has been an FISM production.